I've actually seen other YouTubers get this part wrong, and understandably so, because in my opinion, this is where things get extra weird. You may have heard of wormholes before. The most common explanation, which has become a major sci-fi trope, is by using a paper to represent space-time in 2 dimensions. Normally you would just travel around the plane of the paper, but you could also take a shortcut if you were to follow a path through a higher dimension. This is usually depicted as folding the paper and putting a hole through it to meet up with the desired point on the other side. This would mean traveling a shorter distance than if you were to follow the paper. Wormholes aren't necessarily ruled out by the laws of physics, and by making a few assumptions, there's actually a way we could use this idea to allow time travel into both past and future. This is not something commonly discussed, and it's often simplified without appreciation for how bizarre the process actually is. If this were how time travel worked, it would even explain why no one showed up at Stephen Hawking's time travel party, which I'll talk more about later. One instance of wormhole time travel in contemporary sci-fi is the German show Dark, which I highly recommend. Alright, to make this work, we'll need 3 major assumptions. First, let's say we're here on Earth and that we can create a wormhole. Our next assumption needs to be that this is a short, traversable wormhole. Say we can send an object through one mouth of the wormhole, and it will immediately come out the other, like a portal. Our last assumption is a big one, but we need to be able to move each wormhole mouth separate from the other. What we can do then is take one mouth of the wormhole and put it in an extremely fast rocket. That rocket can now leave Earth's surface and go at an incredibly fast speed, a considerable fraction of the speed of light. We will continue to observe time passing as normal here on the Earth, but if we look up at the rocket, well, its clock will actually be running slower relative to our own. You can think of the wormhole as a single entity, and thus either mouth will experience time at the same passing rate. So if we go into the spaceship and compare its onboard clock with one that we can see back through the wormhole on Earth, the clocks will always be synced. So when the clock on the ship says it's 2:30, the clock visible through the wormhole will also say 2:30, 2:45, 3 o'clock, etc. This is where things get interesting. Depending on whether you look at the clock moving or look at the same clock through the wormhole, you will see different times. Let's say we launch the rocket right at 2 o'clock, so at that time all the clocks match. If we're on Earth and look up at the spaceship, its clock is ticking a little slower, so let's say at 2:30 our time, looking up at the ship clock, we'll see 2:15. Looking through the wormhole, though, the clocks are synced, so we'll see the exact time that we read on our clock on our side of the wormhole, which is 2:30. By 3 o'clock, even less time will have passed for the rocket relative to us, so when we look up, we see that their clock reads 2:30. But looking through the wormhole, it must read the same time as ours once more. It will read 3 o'clock. Now, right at 3 o'clock, we'll go ahead and bring the rocket back down to Earth and redeliver the other mouth of the wormhole. Alright, now we've got both our wormholes back together in space. Once more, I'll mention using some established physics, but also some significant assumptions. So once again, we can go through one mouth of the wormhole and we'll pop right back out, right next to where we started, but you will not exit the other wormhole mouth at the same instant in time. So let me ask you this, which wormhole mouth would you go through if you wanted to travel into the past? Would you go through the blue one left on Earth, or the orange one that was brought onto the spaceship? Feel free to pause the video for a moment and think about it. I've actually seen other YouTubers get this part wrong, and understandably so, because in my opinion, this is where things get extra weird. What I would have said upon first learning of this is that to go into the past, we should go through the blue side of the wormhole that stayed here on Earth. My thought process would be that the clock on the other side reads 2:30, so then we would be traveling from 3 o'clock to 2:30, right? And the other wormhole mouth experienced less time, so hopping out of that one must mean we've gone into the past, right? Turns out that's not the case. Remember I said to imagine the wormhole as a single entity, and that clocks at either mouth will always be synced. For the wormhole, time keeps ticking as normal. There's no one mouth experiencing more or less time than the other. What does happen is that each environment surrounding each mouth of the wormhole experiences time dilation relative to the other. So the wormhole mouth that goes on the spaceship doesn't experience less time. Rather, it remains coupled with the wormhole left on the Earth that has experienced the same amount of time. So if we do as I said at first and go through the wormhole opening left on Earth, we will actually travel to the future rather than the past. If we go through right at 3 o'clock, then the spaceship clock seen through the wormhole must also read 3 o'clock as they stay synced. Even though the spaceship clock outside the wormhole right next to us at this point says 2:30. So we go through the wormhole and the spaceship clock continues to read 3 o'clock during our passage, but Earth's clock will stay 30 minutes ahead of the spaceship clock. So that means the Earth clock must read 3:30, and we just traveled 30 minutes into the future. For time travel into the past, you would want to go through the wormhole that was brought on the spaceship. It would be like a window into an Earth that has experienced the same amount of time as that spaceship. So for us on Earth, we can look through that wormhole mouth and see that the Earth clock reads half an hour behind. Now we can walk through it, and we are traveling back in time 30 minutes. Now it's not that one mouth of the wormhole has experienced any less or more time, rather it has experienced the same amount of time as its corresponding mouth, no matter what. The wormhole in this scenario is acting simultaneously. However, we're applying two separate external conditions that are no longer acting simultaneous. Imagine two sets of wormholes. You go through one at some time, you'll come out the other wormhole mouth that has experienced the same amount of time. This is pretty weird. If anything, it's the wormhole that's acting intuitively. It's experiencing time how we would expect. It's the rest of the universe that's getting all disorganized. If we did traverse the wormhole backward in time, a situation could arise where we meet ourselves. This would result in many of the typical paradoxes that arise when discussing time travel, one being the grandfather paradox. If you could go back long enough before you were born and kill your grandfather, then you would have never been born to go back and kill your grandfather. Therefore, your grandfather must still be alive, and you could still be born. It's an endless paradoxical loop with no answer. So paradoxes aren't good, of course, but if we did time travel using wormholes, it would actually solve one of the problems that Stephen Hawking discussed. That being, if time travel were invented at any time in the future, where are the time travelers now? He thought of hosting a time travelers party, telling no one the date and time of the party until after it had already happened. If anyone in the future could time travel backward in time, then they may return to that place and time of the party. Sadly, no one from the future was able to attend, and Stephen Hawking had to enjoy his time travel party on his own. Even if wormhole time travel were possible, it would still explain why no one was able to make it to the party. Before we could do any time traveling, we needed to send one side of the wormhole up in a rocket going at relativistic speeds. Even if our rocket were going absurdly close to the speed of light, slowing down its clock significantly, the absolute earliest point in time that could be traveled back to would be the moment just after we put the wormhole into the rocket. In other words, you could not travel back in time to before your time machine was invented. That's why we don't see time travelers walking around. Maybe. Additionally, you'd be limited to the times you could reach, because time would continue to pass for the wormhole itself. The earliest date that you could time travel back to would increase with the normal passing of time. So if your rocket experienced, say, 5 years of time dilation, then your time machine could travel into the past exactly 5 years before the present. That means you wouldn't be able to travel back 4 years, if that's what you wanted with that time machine. You could wait an additional year in the present and then travel back, but also then you would never be able to reach any of the dates before then. There are plenty of other interesting ideas to be explored here. Feel free to leave a comment with what you think or any other thought experiments that might come to mind. I find this idea of manipulating the environment around a wormhole to scatter its traversability in time interesting, and maybe a touch disturbing considering its origins in plausible science, despite requiring some very significant assumptions. I hope this video provided some new insight for you. If so, I would ask that you consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.